the truth is my first trip to the Amazon, I was deathly afraid of piranha. Growing up as a boy. How many have been to Peru? Oh, fantastic. Anybody to the Amazon basin? No? To the mountains then, or Machu Picchu?
Yeah, I've been.
Okay, great. Well, my first impression of the Amazon was a Tarzan movie, and I don't know if you've seen, I'm a young guy, I'm only 35, times 2 plus 1, so I'm getting towards the final season of my life, so I've tried to get in as much as I can to explore. But the Tarzan movie, I can't remember which one it was. They are going to cross this river, and it's such a joke because it's taking place in Africa, but yet they've got piranha in this river, which doesn't quite mix, but that's what they did back in those old black and white movies, back in the 50s, I think. So before they cross the river, they send a horse across. And do you remember the scene? Horse goes into the river, and they baited it with blood from pigs, and they got a whole swarm of piranha, just frenzy feed. Well, they put a horse carcass in. Piranha went nuts. So my first exploration was with Mountain Travel. I was a guest as a writer there for a period of 4 months. And so I've never been to a rainforest in my life, and I think I was 31, 32, somewhere. It's too far back to remember, but it was way back. And it was amazing to have my eyes opened by Indian guides. I ended up going into Manu National Park, which is a research area, into the extensive research area. And then I got upriver where even they didn't go, and saw an amazing wealth of wildlife that a Purist Indian guide who spoke a little Spanish, and my Spanish was not so good either, and then a Machaganga Indian. And it was an amazing experience. So I'd love to share that with you. We'll go a little bit over the kind of some statistics before I forget them, but the Amazon is let's see, I've got to figure out how to do this. The Amazon is the largest contiguous rainforest in the world and encompasses about 7 million kilometers. Huge amount of rivers drain into it. It's the biggest watershed in the world. And having looked around and explored somewhat Southeast Asian, there's all kinds of contention. Who has the most biodiversity? South America or Asia? And what's the oldest forest? I don't look at age, because I look at myself at first, but I look at what do you see in terms of species? What are trans-Pacific? And a couple of facts is that the 7 million kilometer basin, the river is the longest in the world. It was contended whether it was the Nile or the Amazon. It's almost 7,000 kilometers long. The diversity, there's said to be 2.5 million species of insects, and it's always growing. Out of the 5,600 species of fish, 3,000 are in the Amazon. It's the greatest fish diversity of all the freshwater rivers in the world. Anybody know what the second most diverse river is in the world?
Probably Mekong.
The Mekong, perfect. Then a couple other small facts is that there's 1,200 species of birds, 40,000 species of plants, 427 species of mammals, and out of that, that's about a third of all the bat species. So in Colombia alone, they recorded 578 species of bats. The greatest diversity is Indonesia, I think 173. So that's pretty amazing. Reptiles, 420, 378 of reptiles, 428 of amphibians. And plants are what is really, I think, amazing in that you get some species like your dipterocarps here, these real tall, twin-seeded trees. Shorea, you get some of the same genus in South America. So you see some of the trees that you find in South America you find here, but yet you don't find hummingbirds here. You have sunbirds, and the condition is the hummingbird. So I'm sure you know most of this, but I thought I'd throw this out. And as a bit of trivia, do you know the greatest fertilization that occurs in the Amazon is from the Sahara? And the winds from the Badeli Depression in northern Chad dump literally metric tons. It's unbelievable by a Kobex satellite that's documented this, all the phosphorus into this basin. So we'll kind of take you through a journey in the areas that I got to visit. We did explore a little bit of the Urubamba, and then the Manu River goes into the Madre de Dios, which eventually goes into the Amazon. The Cordillera, or its history, okay, that's complicated, but I'll take you kind of through Central America first. You had Aztec and Mayan ruins, and there was quite a bit of agriculture that occurred in Central and South America prehistorically, and when well, this is the Cordillera Blanca, and the mountain range that runs from Central America down to the southern tip of Chile is the longest mountain range in the world, followed by the Himalayas. The highest peak is Huascarán, which is about 7,600 meters high, versus, let's say, in Yunnan, you've got peaks about the same height. The Himalayas, of course, average quite a bit higher in their height. Here, it's only about 4,000 meters average. So the dry side is on the Pacific, the wet side is on the Amazonian basin to the east. I had a chance to travel with mountain travel to retrace the steps of Manco Inca, who tried to escape from Pizarro. And so the history of the conquistadors was pretty brutal, as you mostly know. There were huge civilizations that were discovered by, I think it was Vasco da Gama in the early 1500s up the Mississippi. He documented that there were farms and a huge population of North American Indians. And the people that followed 150 years later said he was full of beans. There was literally no Indians there, no evidence of farms or any indication of any civilization that had occurred. It turned out smallpox had completely eliminated the central basin. The same happened in the Amazon. There was all sorts of records. They found Orellana, who was the first to go down the Amazon in 1540, documented a lot of tribes with agriculture. And after they arrived, there was exploration that subsequently occurred, but they found these tribes disappeared, again probably due to smallpox and disease. And part of the civilization that occurred before Pizarro arrived was a huge Inca empire that stretched from Chile north into Colombia. And a couple brothers got in fights once their father died, and one guy killed the other, and Pizarro came in right at the right time to take over this huge empire. So we traced the son of Atahualpa, who escaped through the mountains. This is Nevada, Wasangate. Some of you have seen it. Machu Picchu. This is Choquequirao on the Apurimac River. And the Andeans are amazing. Some of the interesting points about Machu Picchu they discovered more recently is that it was actually an agricultural station. They brought up soils from the bottomlands, had gravel to drain, and they would hybridize plants. If you're familiar with the potato or the tomato family, Solanaceae family, they made the potato edible, the tomato edible, whereas a lot of the wild Solanaceae family are okay for monkeys to eat, but will die. It's got alkaloids in it. So having a chance to see the hard life of the Andeans, this is 35 years ago, so it wasn't there wasn't really tourists that came through, and we saw just an amazing, difficult life. The backbone of the Andes is dry on the west side, and it's very, very wet as you get up into the alpine area. So one of the trips we took in was the Urubamba River, and it goes through, it originates from a lake I'll show you in a little bit. That's the source, one of the sources anyway, of the Amazon. And we kayaked and rafted into this area, and contacted some Machigangas that had very little contact with whites. And unfortunately, 5 years later, the German what would you call him, filmographer created this movie called Aguirre, The Wrath of God. You ever heard of this? Recreating the guy during the Rubber Baron who brought his boat across Urubamba to the Manu River. It was, he really did a lot of damage to the local Indians here. One of the Oxbow Lakes in Manu that I had a chance to see. So this is just some of the waterfalls, some of the areas in the flooded Amazon forest that has a tremendous amount of beauty. So in Central America, I'll kind of briefly go through that. I've forgotten a lot of the history, and I apologize. But the Aztecs and the Mayans did some agriculture, and this is a really beautiful area. Costa Rica and the southern part of Chiapas, Mexico, has a lot of biological diversity. Costa Rica is amazing with birds in the Trogon family that you also get in Asia, that include the quetzal. And a tremendous amount of plant diversity is in the epiphytes, in the canopy. And the thing about the rainforest is it's nutrient poor. The soils are very, very poor. If you look at what we have here in Singapore, they're high content of iron, so they're bright red, but very nutrient poor. So trees that have a strategy of having to capture the nutrients as quickly as possible, and that's through the help of fungal mycorrhizal formations under the leaf litter. And the trees mine that. And it's the same with the canopy. The epiphytes in the canopy will send roots in, accumulate dust and nutrients, and the tree sends roots into those branches. You see the same in the temperate rainforest in Olympic National Park. And that's one of the last photos I managed to get of a golden toad, and it's now extinct in Costa Rica. Apparently, maybe you would know, Carrie, why? Is it I've forgotten, is it a fungus that's attacked and increased in warmth, global warming? The guy on the bottom watched too much TV, I think. The glass-eyed frog. Got to see a resplendent quetzal nest. They love to eat these avocado-sized fruits. Really amazing. This is the Atlantic side on the top, Tortuguero National Park, and on the bottom to the left is the Pacific side. And on the east side, the sea turtles were nesting, and the greenback, the loggerhead, and the leatherback. So you'd find sharks all along the surf patrolling up and down. So we didn't swim on the Atlantic side. The Pacific side's amazing. And as you know, I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir, not just trees in the tropics are heavily buttressed and try and keep stability because the roots are basically shallow. And again, it's the mycorrhizal relationships that help them absorb the nutrients. All sorts of spines. You don't lean on a tree without looking at first. And up to the right, kind of interesting, it's an ant that protects an acacia. It's in the acacia or legume family, and it has a small hollowed out nest inside the plant. The plant provides basically a house, and the ant fire ant provides protection. Huge diversity of butterflies, and of course birds. Cassowary, the helmeted, oh gosh, I forgot the name. On the upper left, and then the cassowary on the right. Not the same as the cassowary from Australia, same name but different bird. So the cat species are rather difficult, and I must confess I've seen one jaguar in the wild, one puma in the wild, but those are captive cats. And the jaguarundi is one of the small cats that spend its time foraging after birds and arboreal rats. You have the cougar in the bottom. We would find in the river, and I'll show you later at night, you'd find the cougar tracks, jaguar tracks, and ocelot tracks, where the nesting turtles on the rivers, the side-neck turtles, would lay their eggs, and the cats would patrol at night and scoop up the nests and eat the eggs. Costa Rica is a very beautiful area. That was a nesting turtle on the bottom. Well, the Amazon was basically discovered by Europeans through Orellana, which had quite a faithful expedition in 1540. He was looking for cinnamon and gold and found neither, but tried to send a boat back. He ended up having all kinds of failure, but he did make it to the mouth of the river. The first naturalist was Wallace, or actually Humboldt, that came through, the Austrian biologist, and then Wallace came through and did some exploration, and before he came to Indonesia. So the areas of Peru that I was privileged to see, I got the chance to go into, if you find Cusco, which I think is here, we explored into the Urubamba River, which eventually meanders into the Amazon. Then we also explored into the Madre de Dios, which is this area, in Puerto Maldonado, and then explored into Manu. So these two areas are very, very wild. Unfortunately, mining has come in and done a lot of damage with some of the Indians. The Mashkos and the Piros and the Machagangas escaped from the rubber barons in the 1930s, and they were conscribed and then were forced to harvest the wild rubber. The women in the villages were threatened by the Spaniards that if the husband didn't produce enough, they were murdered, a hand was cut off. It was very, very brutal. Then we also, the workshops we did were up in the north part of the Rio Napo in Iquitos. So it was a real privilege to get into a very wild area. And this was in 1980 before ecotourism had hit. So I got to lead in 81 a group for the first commercial trip in. And we were joined by two huge long dugouts, as you see up in the upper right-hand corner, by a BBC film team that did the film called Flight of the Condor. And I got to befriend one of the guys, Neil Reddick, who was filming Harpy Eagle. And talk about an amazing story. They located a Harpy Eagle's nest high up in a ceiba tree, silk cotton tree. And they filmed it for a period of, I think, about 5 weeks. And one morning he failed to hook his harness into his rope lead, and he fell 90 feet flat on his back on the forest floor and survived. He's still going strong. He's doing the Philippine Eagle right now.
Oh my gosh.
Guy's built like a gorilla. He's just an amazing guy. He's my age, still not. So ended up having a group of guys from all over. A couple from Seattle came, and we had a Peruvian guy, and just spent some time for the first commercial trip. But before that, I spent a month and a half with two Indian guys. One is Jorge, the other one is Tulio. And I got to see the Amazon and the river through their eyes, but their jokes on me were not appreciated. I'll share a few later. This is part of the Cordillera Blanca, and it's a bit scattered and mixed, but giving you an idea of how these mountains provide a huge glacial water source. This is part of the divide between the Apurimac River, and now they do commercial trips through the Salcantay, Nevada, Huascan area. Amazing bird diversity even in the mountains, the torrent ducks and a type of dipper, which I don't know the name of, and plant in the rose family that grows fairly high, and then lupin, a plant that we commonly get throughout the Americas that you don't have here. So the final, one of the trips we spent 3 weeks was to go around a lake called Sabinacocha. This is an amazing lake. It's one of the sources of the Urubamba, which flows into the Amazon, and a tremendous, you find flamingos. It's in a very alkaline lake. This is at 16,500 feet. I don't know how to convert that into meters or what.
Divided by
6,000?
Yeah.
Something like that, 6,000 something meters. 3.313, but my mind is a little
Just divided by 3.
not so sharp, yeah. And you find tremendous wetlands, several species of unique fish, but above all, the animals that you find in the Andes are quite different than what you see here. And flamingos, ducks, the woodpecker, the vizcacha on the right, and these shots of these wildlife are camera trapped, and they're done by a group called Mammal Watching. So there's puma and a species of deer, and then a small Andean cat. These are my shots of the vicuña, which has the cameloids are pretty much unique in the Andes in that they don't have a hump. Their wool is used. Is a very fine weaving for warmth. They were an animal husbandry by the Indians of Pacas and descendants of the Peruvian. So as you crest into the cloud forest, you find Araucaria, the Andean conch of the rock that has lex, beautiful species of orchids.